I don't believe privilege is uniform or equal for everyone. Salam دوستان خوب هستین? I'm the girl with the lighthouse tattoo, and in this video I'm going to be talking a little bit about my experiences as an Iranian in Canada when it comes to religion, culture, and human rights activism, which I am a big proponent of. So in this video I have some notes written, and I'm going to be using those just to make sure that I say what I mean and mean what I say. I'll touch on my experiences, explain my own perception of my privilege, as well as my perceived disadvantages of being from the Middle East. I'm wearing this headscarf today partially as an homage, but truthfully, the main reason that I am wearing a headscarf is because my hair is a freaking nightmare right now. I need to dye my roots and style it and all sorts of things, so I figured, why not have a little bit of cultural heritage as well as like a religious symbol that lots of people seem to fear. I'm an atheist and I'm wearing a hijab. Did you ever think you'd see that? It's actually pretty common. In certain countries, you have to wear a hijab by law, even if you are non-religious. I grew up with 9/11, so as a 10-year-old, I learned that as a Muslim, you're going to be judged by the things a handful of crazy people do. I personally consider myself an atheist, as I mentioned. Mostly, I can't stand what religion is used to do. It's not because I don't believe in anything. Truthfully, it's the fear of believing. I don't want to have faith in anything and then have that faith used against me. And I can admit that I have immense privilege because of my skin tone. I blend in well enough to not get hassled most of the time. One of the many exceptions of times where I was hassled was during Trump's Muslim ban. I wasn't allowed into the States, despite not actually being Muslim. I have never visited Iran since my family left when I was 14 months old, and I have zero memories of my homeland. And yet I was judged for a religion that I do not adhere to. There are a lot of moments where people tell me to go back to my own country.
Go back to your stupid fucking country.
Really? Racism. Perfect. More racism. What else is new?
Racism's called truth.
It's called racism, buddy.
It's called truth, bitch. Go back to your fucking country.
More insults. What else is new?
I realize that this is the only racist comment that I have ever heard. And it's because most people don't know that much about my country. Not enough to have stereotypes anyways. I mean, there are certain general ones for Middle Eastern people, but not very many specifics, and certainly not any that I have heard. I feel like most stereotypes are reserved for Middle Eastern men or hijab-wearing Middle Eastern women. In a way, it's great not to have these stereotypes, and in a way, it's another form of erasure. My dad is Muslim, most of my family members. The country we are from is called the Islamic Republic of. But I have never been picked on for being Muslim, and that's because I choose to be atheist. It's still affected my life, though. It's never put my life in danger, though. If I had allowed myself to learn about Islam, if I had learned, maybe that'd be a different story right now. But ultimately, I made the conscious choice not to be religious, certainly not to be Muslim. I've actually never read a single word of the Quran, but I have read many verses of the Bible. Many chapters, actually. It's interesting. Ultimately, I chose to be atheist, and I guess I should be grateful for my childhood traumas, the immense empathy that I have for other people. Ultimately, that made me believe that a God couldn't exist, and if he did, that I wanted nothing to do with him, because who would allow such torture and such starvation in the world? Why could certain places be immune from the harsh realities of the majority of the world, while I got lucky that my screaming face as a baby was a good enough distraction for the border guards to accidentally let us into Canada, and then I lucked into this life? I don't deserve the privilege that I have, so I do my best to use it for good. I'm an activist, a photojournalist, and I do my very best to educate myself. But the guilt and shame of being one of the lucky ones is ever present. My experiences seem irrelevant because I'm not an immediately visible minority. To some people, I will never be considered a minority. Plenty of Americans seem to think that being white passing is the same as being white. But in my personal experience with law enforcement while I was in an abusive relationship with a white man, I would personally disagree. Then again, I live in Canada. I don't live in America, and American society is different. I have been to a lot of events in the last 3 weeks. Protests, vigils, marches. It's pretty upsetting to me as a human being that the vigil for the London family that was killed in an Islamophobic attack had the smallest crowd that I had seen in the last few weeks. The least amount of signs and the quickest dispersion of the crowd while speakers were still ongoing. Almost half the crowd left while mourners participated in a prayer in Arabic. The next day, I saw a post on Twitter about a news network calling for the arrest of a high school student who said Allah instead of God during the Pledge of Allegiance. God and Allah are actually the exact same word in two different languages. Personally, I went and Googled the Aramaic word for God because that's the language that Jesus spoke. Guess what? Allah, or Elahi, is what Jesus would have called God. But these Americans are going on about how he's unpatriotic for using the exact same word that Jesus would have used. A child threatened with arrest for using the same word for God that Jesus would. I guess the Stop Asian Hate movement is mostly for East Asia, and the family was from Pakistan, so that would make them South Asian, but I would love to see a world where all Asians can stop Asian hate together. A lot of issues that happen in Canada seem irrelevant online. Our country is ignored by most. But this was a pretty upsetting attack for me personally because it's not the first time and it won't be the last. And countless people will say things like, this is not our Canada, this is not our Canada. I'm sorry, this is our Canada, and it always has been since I was a kid. It has always felt like Islamophobia is okay here. It's felt like that my entire life. I have no doubt that at least part of the reason why I chose to be non-religious is because of my fear of being identifiably Muslim. I was 10 years old when the towers fell. I have known a world where I wasn't allowed into the United States of America with a Canadian passport because of the country that I was born in, even though I'm not Muslim. And when I talk about discrimination, very often people look at my skin tone. They tell me that my experiences don't exist. Apparently, according to the Canadian government, even my language doesn't exist. I filled out the census last month, and the part where it started asking about languages that I speak, I tried to put the languages that I speak. When I wrote Farsi, it tried to correct it to Iranian Persian. Not to make this a history lesson, but the Persian Empire actually ended in 330 BC. It has been 2,351 years since the Persian Empire ended. I was so angry about it that I gave them a piece of my mind in the comments section. I explained that it's equally as racist as only allowing Mexican people to write Mexican Aztec, rather than allowing someone from Mexico to explain that their language is actually Spanish. I'm not Arab. I'm not Asian by most definitions, except for the technical one because Iran is in Asia. And when I tell people I'm Middle Eastern, many say that that's not a race. They tell me that my race is white. The pain of erasure is constant. Let's talk about families and generational trauma for a second. I grew up with a brother who is afraid of fireworks because he grew up with bombs, and every time he heard the sounds, he thought bombs were coming when he was a child. I don't know most of my family. I laugh because it's easier than crying. What does it actually mean? Well, certain members of my family that live in Iran, I've never met. That includes multiple uncles on both sides of my family. I have family spread around Europe, LA, Detroit, a few here in Canada. Most of these people I've met 1 to 4 times throughout my entire life. My aunt, who lives in Köln, Germany, I think I'm pronouncing that the German way, she's the one exception. I have gone to visit her and she's come to visit us more than anybody else, so I've got a pretty good relationship with my one aunt. When I visited her in Germany for Christmas right before COVID hit, a ton of my family who live in Europe came to visit as well, and it was the first time in my life that I understood why people love Christmas so much. The family traditions and just being able to be around your family is such a blessing, and I've truly never had that experience before, and so for the first time, the holidays were a special time for me. At 28 years old, it was the first time I had that many different family members around me all at once during the holidays. Previously, it just kind of made me uncomfortable whenever the holidays rolled around because we didn't have those family traditions or all those decorations or the same kind of ideals that people have gathering around during that time of year. Because where I'm from, we gather around in the springtime for New Year's. Of my 4 grandparents, 3 of them died before I was born. I met my dad's mom one time, and I was about 6 or 7 years old. She came to visit us in Canada, and the only memory that I have of her is a pretty funny one. A squirrel had come onto the deck, and she had never seen a squirrel before, so she was pretty worried that it was going to eat her or something. But the funny thing about that memory is it's actually the memory of a story retold by my brother because I wasn't actually home when that happened. And that's the only thing I remember about my grandmother. The one time she came to visit when I was young. Unfortunately, she died a couple of years after that, back in Iran. She did leave me a chador, which is another wrap but more for your whole body, and she used that for when she was praying. So that's the one thing I have of her, and that was really sweet. When I have friends, like adults who have lost their grandparents, I sympathize, but it's really hard for me to empathize because I don't even have memories with my grandparents. I barely even knew who they were as people. So anyone who has memories of their grandparents, I'm jealous. And it's really hard for me to say that when someone's gone through a really difficult moment. So I always just say, hold on to those memories. Try to say something sweet and not totally selfish, but truly, it's hard not to think, I wish I at least had those memories to hold on to that you do. I find myself desperate for memories. I wish I had gotten to know my grandparents, that I had gotten the opportunity to build a relationship. I hope that I can build relationships with the aunts and uncles that I do have alive now, although most are very far away. I want to get to know them, but how do you do that from halfway across the world? It's funny because when I've looked in the mirror, never once in my life have I seen a white person. I don't see an Iranian. I don't see a Canadian. I just see this weird hybrid that doesn't quite fit in anywhere. Am I saying that I experience the same level of racism as someone in a headdress or someone with darker skin? Absolutely not. And I will repeat that I do have privileges based on my skin tone, and I absolutely recognize that. But my issue is that I don't believe privilege is uniform or equal for everyone. In certain situations, I do have privilege. In other situations, I have faced discrimination. I'll give you an example. Black Lives Matter. It doesn't matter where in the world your ancestors are from. If you are Black, this movement is for you. No one will exclude you. No one will argue the validity of your experience. You are Black, so you are included. Unfortunately, the Middle East is notorious for conflict. Talking to my family about Palestine sometimes leads to arguments because of certain people's ignorant beliefs. Often having conversations about Arabs will come back to how they ruined Iran. I understand where they're coming from, but there is so much more. Centuries and centuries of fighting have left deep scars, and there's nothing united about the Middle East. Racism is rampant, ignorance is excused, and people act like extremism is how everybody on the other side acts. As if every single American was a part of the Westboro Baptist Church. It's just not realistic. Most people are not that extreme on either side, on any side. When I see so many people die just because of their heritage, and that heritage being so close to my own, it's tough because we don't have a movement to unite us. It hurts, man. We just aren't allowed to be upset about oppression the lighter we are. We're not involved in the same kind of story. I don't wear a hijab, so that means I must not experience racism, right? In November of 2019, the Iranian dictatorship started gunning down protesters and shut off the internet to stop people from finding out that they were gunning down protesters because the price of gas had tripled. They started shooting random people, even people who weren't involved in the protests. It got messy and ugly, and no one noticed or even cared. I went to a protest downtown Vancouver, and 31 people showed up, including myself and my father. 31 people. And every single one of those 31 people was Iranian. I didn't see a single ally. Not one. I'll always support human rights worldwide. I care about the climate. I pay attention to as much as one single brain can handle. But I'll never stop noticing how my life has less value in comparison to a white person. People from the country I'm from, they have less value than other people with fair skin. I'm not European. My nose gives it away. It comes down rather than up. It's funny because people who are darker than me will only see my privilege, but they don't see that it's not equal privilege. I could sit here and give you a rundown of all my experiences, including how I've had police interactions, and explain how little my life is valued. But that's a video for another day. Discrimination is very real. And I'll never know if the discrimination that I've faced is because of my ancestry, whether it's because I'm neurodivergent or mentally ill. The joys of having intersectional identities. I have spoken to a number of my friends who are also white passing from different ethnicities, and it's interesting how common the experience of being white passing and having unfortunate encounters, but how unpopular a subject it is online. So I'm fully aware that not everyone's going to agree with me, not everyone's going to care about my perspective. Anyways, I appreciate you guys checking out this video. If I made you think, leave a comment. I gotta feed the algorithm somehow. Nom, nom, nom. Plus, I'd love to hear your perspective. I love learning and growing, so feel free to educate me.